My accent may still give it away. I was born and raised in England. I lived in Warboys, a small village where everybody knew everybody else. As young people, we just loved that. Warboys is in the east of England, in the Fens, very flat. And history supports that Warboys is known for its witches. In the late 1500s, Alice Samuel and her family were the first witches ever to be accused of and executed for witchcraft. I remember my first school blazer vividly, dark green with a bright yellow witch astride a broomstick on the pocket. In the village lived a young woman who I knew very well, and everybody else did too, and her middle initial was P, which we soon found out stood for procrastination. I'm sure we've all met people like her. They're always going to do something special and different. I'm going to see the world was her famous expression, but to which her friends would always remark, we'll believe that when we see it. She maybe had left the village once. And in the early 1960s, Australia and Canada were calling Brits to leave their homeland and see the world. The countries would even pay for part of the fare to fly them to a new and exciting life. What could be more enticing for young people? In 1964, this young woman was coaching field hockey, netball, tennis, and other activities at a girls' private school. Now, as some of you know, in England, students enjoy a break halfway through their studies, and this is called half-term. One half-term, the young woman journeyed to London and found herself in the famous Trafalgar Square. Across the street, she could see a beautiful Greek revival building with a huge Canadian red ensign flag flying from its roof. It was Canada House. She went in for an interview and 3 months later arrived in Canada. By now, you've probably decided that young procrastinator is me, and I haven't changed. Why didn't I choose Australia? Well, I knew 2 people in the whole of Canada and not one in Australia. The man who interviewed me in Canada House really pushed me to go to Winnipeg. He told me, we need more immigrants in Winnipeg. And I told him I really wanted to go to London, Ontario, where I had 2 friends. I pleaded, and he relented. Later, I did live in Winnipeg, and if it had been my first stop, I doubt I would be here telling my story today. I would have retreated to my village in the Fens, very flat. On a clear day, you can see forever, a bit like Winnipeg. I had always imagined Canada with its magnificent mountains. That's not Winnipeg. To this day, when people ask me how long I lived in Winnipeg, I say 2 winters. At the back of my mind was the question, what would it have been like in Australia? So I put it on my bucket list. I'm not sure there was such a thing as a bucket list back then, but I put it down anyway. And in 2019, a mere 55 years later, it was at the top of my bucket list, and I couldn't wait to see the country I chose not to settle in. First, Bob and I cruised around New Zealand. What a beautiful country. We left the cruise in Sydney, and the first night spent a night in a hostel where we could have been to the grandparents to all others staying there. The train journey from Sydney to Melbourne took us through some beautiful countryside. A small camper van was to be our home for the next month as we traveled the east coast of Australia, with Brisbane as our final destination before flying home. The Great Ocean Road we were told was a must. A campground was also recommended to us. It was advertised as park under the koalas. No koalas. They'd eaten all the trees that supplied them with food. But all was not lost, as we were told a 5-kilometre hike would take us to the Cape Otway light station where we would see koalas. Now I must digress. Geocaching is a favorite hobby of mine. It's an activity where you spend hundreds of dollars on a GPS, which will lead you into a forest to find Tupperware, which contains a log, which you sign. Now, how exciting is that? But I love it. And on our 5K hike, we noticed that there was one of the oldest and most famous geocaches in Australia, and we just had to find it. Our GPS indicated we had to step off the gravel path to find this famous geocache. Bob was a few steps ahead of me when I felt something on my foot. I looked down and saw something that Australia is famous for, a large, dark snake. Snakes, I hate snakes. I was calm as I watched it lift its head and bite me not once, but twice. I still remained calm as I said, Bob, I've just been bitten by a snake. We had no cell service, there was no one else around, and we knew one should not walk following a snake bite, but we had no choice. About 200 meters ahead, we could see the famous Cape Otway light station, and we headed there. And there I met my guardian angels, who called for an ambulance. Shane knelt by my side, held my hand, told me how brave and calm I was. I think I fell in love with him right then, while Trish, the light station administrator, applied bandages, being guided by someone via her telephone. The ambulance arrived and the medics decided that as we were 130 kilometers from the nearest hospital in Geelong, a helicopter should be called. It was a windy day and the helicopter, when it arrived, couldn't land on its usual helipad. And the pilot had to choose somewhere else to land. I was in good spirits and knew I was in the safe hands of the 4 crew members. I knew I had a 3-hour window in which to receive anti-venom shots from the time of the snake bite. So all was good, no worries. I was on my way to safety. In the helicopter, I was fitted with earphones and a microphone, and I could hear the crew as they communicated with one another, and I could communicate with them. Steve, who was in the cab with me, said, Val, it's not the way you want to see it, but you're going to get a most beautiful view of Geelong Bay. No sooner had Steve told me about the beautiful view I would witness, I heard the pilot utter 5 words I never, ever want to hear again. What happened there? With those words, the helicopter slowly descended and plunked in a farmer's field. Indeed, the helicopter's engine had failed. I hadn't realized landing in a cow pasture was a part of the itinerary for that day. The obvious question was, Steve, does this happen often? To which he replied, I've been a helicopter medic for 17 years, and this is a first for me. I soon realized that this was not my day. The 3-hour window for receiving the anti-venom was slowly shrinking. And then I hear what I consider panic outside of the helicopter. The gate is closed to the field. How will the ambulance get in? Can someone find the farmer who could unlock it? Or does a neighbor have any access to the field? I was slowly slipping away. I do not know how the ambulance did get into the field, but after a bumpy ride, we're on our way again. I vaguely remember arriving at the hospital and was surrounded by doctors who told me they would be administering two anti-venom shots, one for a brown snake and one for a tiger snake. Both deadly. The snakes, I mean, not the shots. I had been asked earlier if the snake that bit me had stripes. I had to admit I had not noticed. If it had, that would have indicated it was a tiger snake. I can assure you, when you see a big snake slithering on your foot, you do not notice the finer details, but I did know it had green eyes. My next recollection was 3 days later. I learned I had been in an induced coma for 2.5 days. At one point, I had stopped breathing and was put on life support. What an amazing invention that was. When I stopped breathing, the machine did it for me, and when I started breathing on my own, it backed off. I had 2 sons back in Canada who were going out of their mind with worry. So when I was feeling a bit better, I sent them this photo, which should reassure them. I don't think it did the trick. In fact, I know it didn't. To this day, one still has not looked at that photo. While Australia has many venomous snakes, I was surprised to learn that doctors and nurses in Geelong had very little experience with snake bites. One doctor had worked in New Guinea, and he had a little experience. That being said, I received first-class healthcare in Geelong. The staff worked as teams, and I thought they, including the doctors, all looked about 19 years of age, but they were amazing. One doctor in particular went home at night and researched snake bites by calling toxicologists around the country, and next day she would report her findings. Dr. Sarah Huffam, I'll always remember you. Later, I met Dr. David Eddy, who was the doctor who had administered the anti-venom shots. His immediate remark to me is, you're one very lucky person. You received enough venom to kill 1 million mice. How do they know these things unless they had seen 1 million mice killed by one snake? I later learned that Dr. Eddy was not only a doctor, but he was also the coroner for the area. Thank goodness he was a doctor on the day I met him. I was told on a number of occasions that being in good shape and active saved me on that fatal day, February the 6th, 2019. No wonder I'm such a fitness advocate. I spent 2 weeks in hospital, and 1 week in rehab before being allowed home, to fly home to Canada. I was asked on a number of occasions if I had an out-of-body experience. No, I didn't. Kind of disappointing, and I'll have to put that one on my bucket list and hope I never, ever strike it off. I think my story supports my decision in 1964 to emigrate to Canada rather than Australia. I think we live in the greatest country in the world, and I'm proud to say I'm Canadian.